Prakash. So today I want to start off with giving you some time to talk about your background and what got you into writing this book.
Yeah, man. Well, Jonathan, it's great to be here talking to your audience. The reason why I wrote the book essentially is that there was no artificial intelligence book for Gen Z. I was part of the COVID cohort for university. Basically, I had one semester in person, and then the rest of my university was essentially Zoom university. So I had a lot of free time on my hands. But I was already going to study artificial intelligence. I was going to go into the ethics of AI, but COVID kind of, disrupted that plan. And we're going to probably use the word disrupt a lot in this conversation. And I thought, you know what? I really want to study AI in relation to philosophy. Why don't I just do it myself? So I read every book, listened to every podcast, read every AI paper I could get my hands on. But a filter I had was, how does this relate to my generation? Because we talk about job automation, autonomous weapons, deep fakes, virtual politicians. And that's all, those are all interesting conversations and they're necessary conversations. But there was never even a paragraph talking about how is the younger generation, how is the next generation coming up going to be affected by this? And I thought that was a strange but massive gap to fill. Just talking about how artificial intelligence is going to disrupt Gen Z, but in Gen Z's language. I don't think there's a reason to write a book aimed at Gen Z if Gen Z don't understand it. And so I thought to myself, I have a modicum of understanding of AI, but I'm Gen Z. I can see the problems in my generation. Why don't I take a stab at writing this? And, the book has taken me to very interesting places so far.
Interesting. And, I really want to give you some props in writing this book because before I read this book, I inherently thought this is going to be another doomsday type of book saying how AI is going to destroy the world. And it's going to be overly heavy on AI and the jargon within that industry. And it really wasn't. And I feel like anyone would be able to read this book and understand what you're saying and not be bored to sleep. So I really do want to give you some props for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. And it's one of those things where I was also bored at times writing that jargony, AI doomsday book. This was the third draft essentially. And I thought, why am I doing something that's already been done? We have Super Intelligence by Nick Bostrom. We have Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. We have, Human Compatible by Stuart Russert. These are all groundbreaking books. They're great books. I think there needed to be something different. Go ahead.
I was going to just ask, so this is your first book. What is your plans for the future? Are you working on any current projects?
Yeah, so as we were talking about before, I am releasing a second edition. Just talking about this first edition was released in 2022. I was still at university. I wasn't working for an AI startup like I am now. Now the second edition is talking about everything that has happened in between 2022 and 2024, which is, as your audience knows, and as you know, a lot has happened since then, just in the AI industry alone. And I'm also looking to write a crypto book as well, just talking about what cryptocurrency is, how that relates to my generation, and just, thinking about how we can use some of the principles, some of the understandings, some of the philosophies in crypto without necessarily all the snake oily, invest in this currency and become a millionaire in the next hour.
So let's dive into this topic and see what are some of your thoughts. And I hope you're prepared to be pushed back on. I'm just going to lay out my impression. I started this podcast thinking that 50% of the workplace would be drastically impacted by AI in some form, by either erasing jobs, displacing jobs, or doing some type of large impact to it. And I want to see what your stance is.
I mean, I think it's different for every Gen Z in general. Like, I think the Gen Z in America would have different problems to the Gen Z in India, who would have different problems to the Gen Z in Nigeria. Um, Wholesale, I think the two or three biggest ones are climate change, job security, and economic affordability. I kind of leave the latter one because I'm not an expert and also it's relatively uninteresting to me. But climate change is relatively interesting. And then job security is like the massive one where I think you and I will agree in some areas and disagree in other areas. I do definitely think that job automation is going to be a massive problem. I think we've already seen glimpses of it. Like, for example, a startup CEO in India last year automated 90% of his workforce, 23 people, just replaced them with an AI chatbot. Can companies do this en masse? Probably not. But we are also seeing, a lot of software developers being automated out. Um, Maybe not the top 1 to 5%. Those will always have job security. But I'm talking about the junior to maybe um, mid senior levels of just, if you're just getting into the industry, you probably don't stand a chance just because the playing field is very level now. Um, and for Gen Z in particular, we're coming out of a pandemic. We're also the digital natives. So our social skills, our emotional intelligence, our ability to problem solve, our ability to actually have focus and attention, they're very low, like spread out across the generation. And when you think of modern jobs or even jobs for the future, these are all very necessary. Excuse me. These are all very necessary skills that we need that we're not developing and that don't seem to be improving as time goes on. They only seem to be diminishing.
Yeah, you've mentioned some good points, and one of my guests I had on previously, they mentioned that AI will replace jobs. So the future is probably going to look something like universal basic income. Maybe put a tax onto companies using AI so that you could spread that wealth across the board. And I think the idea is that AI would provide more time to allow us to go be creative and rebuild those social skills that we have diminished throughout our time. What are your ideas on that?
Oh man, you introduced so many threads that I want to pull on each one of them. We can go to UBI, absolutely. In terms of job automation and this like rapid, recapitulation of the job market, I don't see that happening as it was previously intended, but I do see a lot of jobs being completely erased. I don't see the, accelerationist, like between 2025 and 2031 there's going to be like a billion people out of work. I don't see that. It doesn't mean that I can't be wrong, obviously. I just, from what LLMs can do, from what current robotics can do, I'm not really seeing how companies would look at that and say, hey, let's get rid of humans in lieu of these very very like very early robots that can only do a handful of things. In terms of UBI, I would love to believe that that would work, but every way I've looked at UBI, it does not seem. I'm not trying to come at this from a political way. It's just you can't really give people cash because there's no guarantee that they'll actually spend it on groceries. So you give them 2,000 in their checking account, and it's like, oh, I spent the 2,000 on lottery tickets. Like, how do you manage that? You can't really. I mean, then the next argument is like, let's just subsidize everything, which is a separate, angle to come at. um, and it's also, how do you continuously only give like arbitrary number 2,000? It should be increasing, right? And then separate to UBI, and this is one thing I haven't really heard people talk about, is this problem called the job saturation problem. This is just how I think about it in my head, where, and this is in relation to automation, where you automate one job and then you have all of the people in that job trying to reskill into different jobs, right? And so you have a lot of saturation in all of these other fields, all of these other roles. And so there is only incentive to hire the top 1 to 5% in those roles again. But there's also a massive incentive to automate those roles. And so as you automate more, you also have more people saturating the job market, which will only give more incentive to automate those roles, further saturating it. And I don't see a solution to that either. Um, yeah, it's a strange time to be in. It's a strange prospect to have, and it does. I don't mean to be like super progressive or something, or techno progressive, but it's like, it does seem like we need to rethink how society functions. It doesn't seem like work should be this all-encompassing, identifier for an individual. And these are radical ideas, but it's like if we're automating again 50 to 90% of the workforce, if people literally cannot find work and we're going to have to pay them, monthly salaries or something, it doesn't seem like most people want to sign up for that reality. But then the alternative is just like a cyberpunk dystopia. So I mean, it's just incentive for conversation at this point.
I think we're in a great place because the Gen Zers out there are at this point where they get to decide what the future looks like. Because as I was reading your book, they're starting to outnumber the other generations. And so they actually are starting to have the power and influence that can drive some of this change, which, as much as us older generations want to say, it's probably needed. And as I had one of the other podcasts, we talked about the importance of establishing what is success and culturally how that impacts the person. And so I think that's where we're going down is we as a person, as an individual, need to be able to define what success is. And, maybe it's not driving the Lamborghini, but it's, having all of your needs met and now reprioritizing the family and social issues. Let's get back to the climate change, because I think this is where we could have some good discussion on this topic. So let's talk through why Gen Z is so adamant about the climate change and having an impact into it.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask on that front. And I think the climate change argument from every Gen Z is a bit nuanced. I'm honestly more of an opposer to their psychology or maybe ideology around climate change. Like, for example, 76% of Gen Z claim that climate change is one of their biggest concerns, with 36% placing it as their like pinnacle cause for the future of humanity. And it's like, yeah, sure, but I don't think that throwing soup on paintings, for example, is a good way to handle it. And it becomes one of the meta problems of I don't know why this generation is so has this proclivity to complain all the time. Like, yeah, sure, we can shout in the town square, whether it's on X or physically, that climate change is a problem, and maybe it is. You can read a variety of books and come to that conclusion yourself. But what are you doing about it? Like, you have technology, you have the internet, you have society. Why don't you build companies? Why don't you create technologies, innovate in this space in order to do something to alleviate climate change? Like deep pollute the oceans, carbon capture, all of these really cool technologies. It's not like there's a lack of innovation in the space, but I don't see why a lot of my friends, for instance, they just complain, oh, we're all probably going to die by 2040 or 2050, so I'm just going to max out my credit cards. I'm like, that's such a strange way to think of, instead of thinking, oh, there's a prospect that we're all going to die by 2040 or 2050 because of these climate concerns. Now I actually have a deadline to do something. Let me, become an expert in these fields and then create a company or join a company, join a mission, join a cause. And I don't know. And again, maybe I'm speaking to my ignorance. I don't know if a lot of Gen Z have this very focused mentality of, oh, climate change is a problem and I'm able to solve that problem, rather than climate change is a problem and let me just post on Instagram about, the polar bears dying.
Yeah, I asked that question because I was reading through your book and I was reading a part where it was talking through Gen Z is more immediately impacted by the climate change than someone like me who may be on my way out as it's having more of an impact. And so, I thought that was a good topic you were bringing up in that part of your book. One of the topics I want to go into is ethics in AI and some of the challenges and some of the future issues we'll have from developing regulations. Do you have any insights on how that could impact the future of AI?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things to talk about when it comes to ethics and AI. It becomes a cultural relativistic problem using James Rachel's terminology, kind of just like ethics in AI is very um, subjective to what society you're in. Like ethics in AI will be different in America versus China, for example. And we're already seeing that. As regulations in America and the EU are very, very different from regulations in China. Um, where specifically do you want to talk about ethics in AI? Is it ethics for an individual, ethics for companies, ethics for societies?
I think let's start through the ethics of building out models and, how that can impact the individual.
Sure. I mean, ethics for building out these large language models, there are three major things from my understanding. There's the pollution, both in the physical realm and in the information realm. And there is this massive problem of data capture, IP infringement. So, pollution in the physical realm, LLMs use a lot of energy and a lot of water, and they expel a lot of carbon. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but it's a shocking amount. And this is just to train one. Imagine training multiple across the world. And the problem with LLMs, one of the problems is that they only get bigger. Like you need more data, you need more and more and more to get more performance. And so this problem of if we need ChatGPT or if we need GPT-5, if we need Llama 4, GPT-15, Llama 16, we need way more energy, water, and that fully results in more carbon being emitted. We talk about the climate change fiasco, and it's like Gen Z love generative AI, but they also don't like climate change. And it's like you can't hold those two things simultaneously. It's A and not A. In terms of information, there's a lot of data from a lot of different places that come that's fed into LLMs. Obviously, LLMs are trained on data. It's a bunch of math and code and statistics. And we've seen that a lot of the articles now are just AI generated. So what does that do? The AI generates articles, and those articles are fed back into LLMs. And so you have this like corruption of the internet, this like recursive corruption, this downward spiral of of information. And frankly, I don't mean to be philosophical, but then we have to define what information is. Because if information before were just internet articles or whatever, now with AI that is just regurgitating ideas, that's not, in my mind, real information. And it becomes like this cesspool in your mind, to be very, graphic. And then you have the problem of IP infringement. And I think the alarm bells were sound or were rung. At 2023, there was a fair in Colorado, if I remember correctly, and the artist used artificial intelligence to win. And every artist and their mother was just like horrified and shocked and outraged. And how could AI win an art competition? What is AI art? Can AI create art? And it's a fair question. It's also a very philosophical question, which I'm not um, credentialed enough to talk about. But the point is, we're now seeing ChatGPT and Midjourney and Leonardo AI and a bunch of other systems creating these artworks en masse. Like you don't really need a graphics designer anymore. You can just create these elements. I mean, these things are in Canva and Figma now. And a lot of artists are like, wait, hold on a minute. You train the LLM on my artwork, and now you profit? Or I don't get any, I don't get any credit. I don't get money from this. I created it, but you get all the benefit. Is this not? It's some form of stealing, right? It's copyright infringement, and we're seeing a bunch of celebrities. I mean, Sarah Silverman. I think she's suing OpenAI. A bunch of people are like apoplectic of just like, you guys stole a bunch of, and this is in the realm of text generation, but they're like, you guys stole all of our work. You guys didn't tell us about this. You guys didn't ask us permission. And now we are screwed over because everybody and their mother has this democratized access to ChatGPT and to Claude and to, all of these other chatbots. And we've lost fundamentally. I mean, we saw this big fiasco. It should have been bigger, of Scarlett Johansson. They stole her voice, right? Like, and everybody was just up in arms. But yeah, that's what happens when these companies, and I don't mean to be, too like destroy big tech or whatever, but it's like, yeah, if you allow all of these companies this unlimited power, they're going to abuse it. They've been abusing it since like 2010 in ways that maybe you were not familiar with. So yeah, that's kind of where we're
Yeah.
at.
I would even argue that they've been abusing it since even before that. I remember reading a
Okay.
book about a company, and the company was in charge of building dams, and they knew the dam. It was in Virginia. The dam was about to uh, fall apart and be destroyed by the water, and there was a city below it, and they did the cost analysis, and it was cheaper for them to let it destroy the whole city and then rebuild the dam. And so there's this ethical issue behind that. And, you bring up a point that I didn't think about, in the sense of, you mentioned how people are could be upset or are having these issues with the copyright of their voice or their actual intellectual property. But one of the things that you just made me think through is, if I am a professor, the way maybe it's not monetary, but I build an apprentice who could come along, I teach them and train them on my, models, if you want to call it that, for AI. And so the AI companies are kind of doing that. And I didn't think through it in that way. So you did open up my eyes to that type of IP infringement. What are your thoughts on the bias of the data? Because many of the people using AI just use it, and they don't understand the impact it's going to have on the outputs that they're putting in. They don't understand prompting. They don't understand any of these issues. And when you go into automation, you're only as good as your prompt as you go down that automation.
Yeah, bias in AI is bias and responsibility. Bias in AI is a really interesting thing, this kind of like facet of the system. There is no real solution to that. I think this is going to be kind of a pattern of the conversation of we've kind of like created all these problems with no solution, which is typical of humans. But to answer your question, bias is basically like the data that an AI is trained on only conforming to like a certain group or a certain demographic, and usually that is, um, white males, Western white males, certain between like 25 and 45. I believe that's like the majority. And so what happens is, for example, I think in the book, not to advertise it, but just in the book, I think I gave an example of the facial recognition systems of a bunch of companies. I think Microsoft, IBM, and this Chinese company, Megvii, they were tested. And the error rates for white males were, I think, 1 in 1,000. And the error rates for black females jumped up to 1 in 10,000. And so, or maybe it was vice versa. But the point is, like, certain demographics are not represented in those systems. So for facial recognition, sure, it's not really a big deal. But when it comes to autonomous vehicles, for example, I want the AI to recognize my face as a human and not, a garbage can, to be kind of crass. I want the error rates to be very low for my demographic, right? 'Cause I have curly hair, I'm a bit tan, I probably am not I'm not represented in the large, data set. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing in healthcare, a lot of bias can play a massive, massive role if it's used for triage purposes, for example. Um, we fortunately have not seen biased AI play out in large in like very, very kind of just major ways in society. Like there hasn't been a Scarlett Johansson OpenAI scandal of biased AI, for example. But I do think that going to this nationalistic route, biased AI could have a major role to play of like, is biased AI going to influence communism in China? Is biased AI going to influence, democracy in America? Is the political leanings of companies going to dictate what is in future society? So, for example, I think a lot of big tech, most of big tech, are left leaning, and that is represented in the answers that the chatbots give. Now, is that democratic? I don't have the answer for you, but can that play a role for future voting patterns? Absolutely. And so these are the kinds of issues that we need to talk about of if every Gen Z and Gen Alpha are getting biased left-leaning answers, is that fair? Is that, transparent? Who is responsible for that?
Yeah, you've mentioned a few topics that are very challenging. And one of the, I like to talk through analogies. And one of the analogies I can give is I listen to a lot of podcasts, and then I see people communicate ideas on the internet, and I can tell what podcast they start listening to because they become align with the ideas and the thoughts that that person is putting out, which is pretty interesting. But then that leads you to think, how would the chatbots and the GPTs impact the political structure in the future, and have the leaning? Are we going to be leaning left? Are we going to be leaning right? And I know you probably don't want to go into the politics of it, so we can get back into the data.
I'd love to touch on that, not the politics, but you talk about kind of, you were touching on attention span. And that is one thing where generative AI is collapsing attention spans across the generation, which were already low. Um, One of the problems with Gen Z is that they don't take 15 minutes to check whether what they've shared, or excuse me, what they've consumed is true. So they could, during COVID, they were just sharing things up the hoo-ha, and they didn't know whether it was real or not. But the societal effects of things that are constantly shared, we know that if you see something consistently and constantly, you just deem it to be true, right? Just off base. And so what we're seeing with generative AI is that, number one, what you could be seeing could be literally false. We call it the hallucination problem, which is a bad name, but it's kind of the BS problem of generative AI, where they can just like make stuff up. So it could literally say, French is the most spoken language in Portugal, and a lot of people will take that on face value. But worse, they might take that and share it and make that truth, lowercase t. And then people just run around with these algorithms, with these ideas, and then they percolate in society. And you haven't even done your due diligence as a human, as someone who is, constantly consuming information, because there is so much to fact check. And so we're creating a generation with a high proclivity to complain, with a low tendency to fact check. We're creating them, we're influencing them to have literally no attention span and no focus. Remember, people love, like, content creators will agree with this, that in order to hook people, you need it's within the first 3 seconds, right? It's within 3 to 15 seconds. 3 seconds on TikTok, around 10 to 15 seconds on YouTube. Why? It's attention span. Look at modern advertising and marketing. Like, look at an ad from the 1960s versus an ad now. It's totally different. An ad in the 1960s, they're slow, it's paced, they're holding your hand, they're explaining the product. Now it's just stimuli, stimuli, stimuli. And so these are all, like, these seem independent, but they all factor into how are Gen Z and Gen Alpha going to be thinking, not just about politics, but let's take, for example, climate change. If I can't focus, if I have no attention span, if the algorithms I'm running in my head are fundamentally incorrect, and if I can't fact check information properly and everything I take on face value I treat as truth, how am I going to solve climate change? It's like, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It seems like a non-starter, and I don't. And this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to write the book, is that I don't see these conversations being had in society. I don't see a lot of adults, and I do think adults have a moral imperative and a real responsibility. Adults, meaning like older generations or past generations. Um, I don't see a lot of baby boomers, a lot of millennials talking about this, and not talking about it from a condescending way, but just like, hey, we've seen Gen Z exhibit these patterns of behavior. We think it's unhealthy. We want to help you guys reorient yourselves back on track. I don't see that. And I also don't see a lot of Gen Z being even open to that assessment. I see a lot of dismissal in my generation of, oh, these are just older generations. They're going to die off soon. You know, all of their views are archaic and traditional and conservative. And we understand the world much better. They don't understand our digital nativity. So let their issues and their problems just die off and we'll take care of it. It's like, sure, it's aggressive and abrasive to believe that if you have some kind of conviction, but I don't see, from all the things that I just described, I don't see how you have any substance, how that has any substance if you can't focus, if you don't know. Yep.
Yeah, you've made a lot of great points, and one of the things I want to get on is and talk through is the responsibility, and you're talking through that right now, and I know that's heavily into your book, and I do want to. What you're saying makes so much sense, and it's so true. And in my opinion, I think our generation, our older generation, millennials, we have a responsibility to mentor and bring up the younger generation. And in doing, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't turn them off. One of the benefits I have, I think, is that I'm in the older crowd, so they open up. It's like when you're in that group, they you can really see what the people are saying, and they'll open up to you, and they think you're in the group. But I have this openness to listen and learn to everyone from everyone, and I think that helps me see the challenges. And so the older generation, I think we failed at being able to mentor. We just were too busy. We could make up a line, we can make up a list of all these excuses of why it didn't happen, but it didn't happen. And so now I think we do have to come together and put aside the issue of, oh, you have to go through struggle to be able to be successful, or you have to. There's so many different things that the older generations, the millennials, have that we say, you don't know what struggle is, or you don't. But everyone's struggle is different, and we just have to accept it and be willing to listen, and then come together to solve this issue. And so I say all that to get on the topic of whose responsibility is it when I say it is to manage the AI and manage the future of AI.
Well, responsibility is a very fickle thing. A lot of people love assigning a responsibility to others, but they really just, they relinquish um, accepting responsibility for themselves. And I don't understand why that is. In terms of whose responsibility is it to control AI, I would say it's yours. It's absolutely yours. Whose responsibility is it to control alcohol? It's yours. It's just because the alcohol is on the shelves does not mean that you have this, incentive to drink. It's like, yeah, sure. If you need to have a glass of wine with, your partner, that's very romantic. It's nice. Is that something where you should be doing it every day and you should complain that you're addicted because it's available in broader society? No. Obviously I have different views of like, should alcohol be available en masse? I don't think so, but that's a different conversation. In terms of using artificial intelligence as a generation, you have the internet. You can see how these technologies work. Not just artificial intelligence, social media. You can see how adult websites prey on you. You can see how dating apps influence. How motivated and inspired you are to go out and seek a mate. You have all of this research. Use it. It's your responsibility to go out on the internet or into society and find the answers to your questions. You can't just number one, you can't trust everything you read online, so you have to fact check it. But number two, you have these tools and skills and knowledge widely and readily available for free. It's like I really struggle with understanding that aspect of my generation where we complain, but we also have the solutions to our complaints. And all we have to do is like open the drawer. You know,
So
it's like it.
I do kind of want to push back on this a little because
Go,
I
please,
do
please.
believe I agree with you. It is your responsibility. You have the responsibility because you're using something like you said, alcohol. It's kind of the same, and you do have this responsibility because you're creating and you're publishing it so other people can read, and you may not understand what it's doing in the back end and how it's creating um these discussions and starting to fuel these new ideas. But how does someone do that with work, school, learning a new job? Because AI, in my opinion, is going to transform these jobs. So people are going to have to relearn how to do their jobs. They're going to have to learn AI and how to use AI. Because one of the main thesis that I have is that AI is not going to take your job, but someone using AI better than you will take your job. So how
Mhm.
do you have time to search the internet, validate the information, and when we're working in this environment, that's the fastest and newest thing going on.
I'll push back on your pushback. Um, I don't agree with this sentiment of I don't have the time to research how these technologies are affecting me. It's like, are you joking? What do you mean you don't have the time? It's not like if this was like in the 1800s or something and you had to go to like a library and look through the entire encyclopedia, sure. But you need like 30 minutes to really understand how social media is impacting you. You need 30 minutes to understand how generative AI is impacting you. And I'm not saying you spend 30 minutes and then you'll immediately get it, but 30 minutes every day is not really going to hurt. You know, you probably spend that on the metro or or in if people are saying that I don't have the time to do something, this is just an excuse. You have the time to understand how these technologies will work. We have podcasts, we have audiobooks. You don't need to like um, actively read. You can passively listen. There's so many angles for Gen Z or for anybody to understand how these technologies will work and affect them. And let's broaden this point out of you have no excuse to see problems in society and drop the ball and not try to change them. This is not to be like sanctimonious or whatever, but like when I saw this, have you seen the movie Don't Look Up, for example?
I have not.
So it's just about like these, spoiler alert, but these two scientists, Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, which is hilarious that they're scientists, but they see this like meteor coming to Earth and it's about to hit, and so they're trying to like warn the public of like, hey guys, this is coming. We have the data, we have the evidence. We have to do something about it, and it's just like the world's reaction to it. It's a great film. It's very philosophical. The point is, I kind of had that moment of, oh crap, this is a meteor that's going to hit my generation. This is a runaway train, and we're all strapped to the tracks. How do I get my generation to untie themselves so we can move away, so we can build something, so we can do something? And so I think similarly, you have no excuse to see these problems in society and not do something about them. If you need a bunch of steps before acting, like I understand a lot of my generation are on SSRIs. A lot of my generation can't focus. They are addicted to adult sites. They are addicted to dating apps. They are addicted to social media, addicted to sugar, addicted to cannabis. All of these things. I understand that. I'm sympathetic to that. I'm not trying to be abrasive, but you also have you live in the greatest moment in the history of our civilization to do something about that. The most important skill, I believe, is introspection, is to be able to look at yourself, look at the way your mind works, and see, is this serving me? Are these things that I go about, that I use, these mental faculties that I uphold on a daily basis, is this healthy? Is me constantly thinking about my social media posts on Facebook and Twitter or X, whatever? Is this healthy for me? Is me focused on trying to get as many likes on a dating app? Is that healthy for me? And I think if my generation, and this is very like spiritual and meditative, but I think if we do start incorporating these practices, I think we'll see a lot of people kind of being like, no, hold on a second. I lost my phone for 3 days and I couldn't use dating apps and social media, but for those three days, I felt great. Oh my God. I'll give you an anecdote, for example. And I've seen this, every single person I've ever talked to has had a story like this, and it just speaks volumes. They, for some reason, forget their AirPods, they forget their headphones, and they need to go around society. And they notice things that they had been subconsciously aware of, but they were focused and conscious of these things. And they noticed beauty. They noticed certain certain aspects that had never occurred to them while they were stimulated. And that is, I think, the most profound thing that we all have experienced, which is, technology can be an augment to your life. Absolutely. Generative AI can augment your life in a handful of ways. I'm not saying it's a useless technology, but to be healthy, what it means to be healthy, what it means to be human, I don't think has to overly involve technology. I think that, go ahead.
Keep going. I edit this out.
I think that if Gen Z in particular, but I think if every person that uses technology can look at their lives and say, does technology need to influence this part of my life? Or is technology a healthy influence on this part of my life? I think that's a very important question to ask, and will solve a lot of the issues. I think if you're not using technology every single day for hours a day, you gain your attention span back. You can focus more. You can read more. You can look people in the eyes more. We talk about Gen Z not being able to make eye contact. Yeah, because it's here all the time. That's why, or they're not able to. They don't have the social skills. Yeah, they don't need it. That's why they text really fast. Like as you go down the list, all of these problems, it links back to technology. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you've mentioned a lot of things, and I've seen that. So I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I noticed she does the same thing. She'll look around when she's talking, and I get down on my knees, and I'm like, no, stop whatever you're doing, look me in the eyes, and let's talk. And you kind of have to work on it. And I think we have to start at a point, and part of that is, like you said, self-reflection, and then address that self-reflection and do little steps. Have your SMART goals to align it to progressively get better. You
Can I
mentioned
ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So this is one of the things where I've been thinking about parents and how parents should be treating their children and how they should be using technology and teaching their children about technology. I have a little riff that goes, we have the sex talk, we have the drug talk. I think it's time to have the technology talk where you talk to your kids and you say, look, you have access to a lot of adult content now. You have access to dating apps, which means that you don't need to go into wider society. You can just sit in your room and swipe. You have access to social media, and social media is going to make you feel like utter crap at times. It's going to ruin your mental health. And I think that parents need to really start incorporating these conversations with their kids on a daily basis, and just say, look, are you being affected by these things? Is social media affecting you? Your likes on Instagram do not dictate your social status. Okay. The amount of swipes that you get on Tinder is not reflective of how attractive you are. The adult content that you consume is actually very unhealthy. It's electric cocaine. It's hyper normal. It's not, you're not built for that. The reason I bring this up is, are you going to be having these conversations with her? Have you already started? If it's too personal,
No, I'm fine. So she's 5, so she doesn't have any social media. So you understand my standpoint. I'm 37,
Mm,
And literally right before I started doing this podcast is when I started my social media. So I didn't have social media before that. I
mm,
was the one that would go out and they would say, "Hey, what's your Facebook?" And I would tell people I don't have Facebook. And they would look at me like I was crazy. And the main reason that I didn't have it before wasn't because of the effects it was having on me, but it was more because of the industry I worked in. I know you track people that way. They sell all your information, they sell your data, which was another topic I was going to go into. And so this is where I stand. If she has a social media, I think there's a point where she would have the social media. I would manage it, and
mm.
it would be a reel for her. So she would have all her pictures, more of a memory saver, where she could jump in when she's 18 or 16, and then I think we would have that conversation. I'm not ignorant to the fact that she's going to be influenced by her friends. So you do bring up a good point that I haven't thought of, in the sense of we do need to have those conversations. And, it's really challenging because what I've learned from being a parent, I don't know if you're a parent yet, but what I've learned is your children do what they see. And I say that because my form of communication is to shut down. And so when I have an issue, I kind of shut down because, one, I don't want to address a problem, but then the other part is I'm kind of reflecting before I address the issue or whatever the problem is, so that I don't get overly emotional or angry or in that sense. And so what I've noticed in her is that she would do the same, but she doesn't realize why I'm shutting down, so that I can understand what I want to say and then address the issue. So yes, having this open communication, and I do think we do need to have this communication. But that's where I stand with the social media,
Mm.
and I do think it's something we need to have sooner rather than later. But the age and the challenge, I don't know when. I'm in Florida right now, and they've just passed some laws about social media and the children and 18 years old. You have to be 18 years old to have social media here in Florida now. I don't know how they validate that. And so, in my opinion, I think my daughter will have social media when she's older, but I know there's going to be some impact on her. So I hope I answered your question in that.
No, you absolutely did. It's a fantastic law, and it's an important law. And you touched on something where I think it's very important that she is going to be influenced by her friends, and so this is another massive opportunity to bring back the community. You know, all of her friends are probably in the community, you probably live in the same vicinity. Let's create a massive community, another town hall type place where we can go and we can talk about these problems. So she's not like this ostracized individual when she goes to her friend's house and they're all on Instagram in the group chat and she's the only one not there. It's another opportunity for us to look at these. I think a lot of the effects on that technology has had on us have made us very like non-human.
Yeah,
Uh,
have you there's a podcast I listen to called Chris Williamson.
I
His
love him.
it's Yeah, he's really good. His most recent one, he was speaking with a young lady, and they were talking through this same type of concept, where the technology we have and the swiping right and all these dating apps are impacting people, where now they're getting to a point where the younger generation doesn't want that, and they want to have a face-to-face connection, where they want to meet someone in a grocery store or in a bookstore, but no one knows how to do it.
Right. And again, this is another opportunity where we're human. Like we don't really think about our current place in history, where it's like it's such a weird thing that a bunch of apes just like stood up straight and created everything around us. Like this is not default Earth. This was like a bunch of jungle and stuff. Um so the reason I say that is like we are an adaptable species. We are in the Arctic, we are in the Sahara, we can go anywhere and do anything. And so one of our biggest advantages is our adaptability to certain environments. It's why we've gotten so used to texting when these same algorithms that make us adaptable were used to throw spears. It's the same software, right? And so the reason I say that is we can learn how to go back. We can adapt back to a society where it is beneficial to us. We can adapt back to a society. We can, first of all, build a society that is beneficial, that is not, addicting and harvesting. And we can also adapt to that where we can meet, you know, whatever you're into in a bookstore, in a grocery store, these chance encounters, having these serendipitous moments. Yes, absolutely. When you start thinking about it, swiping right and conjuring love is not really going to happen. There is like it's empty, you know? Using adult sites is empty. We don't want that, but it's there because of
So
technology.
going into this topic, what are your thoughts of the future of AI and dating? Because I know they have AI robots coming out, and this will be our last topic because I want to hold you to time and I don't want to go over your time and respect it.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. No, it's been a great conversation. AI and dating. Oh Lord. Um, I am very worried about these prospects. Have you seen Black Mirror? Be right back at all?
I have seen Black Mirror. I don't know if I've seen that episode, but I can only imagine. But when it
Remember?
relates to me, what
Yeah,
I always go back to, and I've never watched this movie because I thought I was like, when the
her,
movie came out, I said, this is such a dumb movie. This would never happen. It's the guy who falls in love with his phone,
her.
Joaquin Phoenix. Her, yes. And so I've never watched it, but I always think of that.
Yeah. That's I think already happened. Um, I think Black Mirror Be Right Back is essentially like, spoiler alert, she loses her boyfriend or fiance, and so she uploads a bunch of stuff into a chatbot, and then they go a step further, and she turns the chatbot. There's a service where you can implant the chatbot's brain into an actual human. Um, so we already have that chatbot. It's called Replica. And it was created in a very similar way. It's eerie how similar it was, where I think Eugenia Kuderov, or Eugenia K, she lost her best friend. And so in order to like techno resurrect him, she uploaded a bunch of his artifacts into a chatbot and she started talking to it. And that has created this app that's resulted in this app called Replica, where people can create these avatars of women or men or whatever. 40% of those people, by the way, are already in marriages. And they can just have these conversations and these relationships, like literally relationships with this entity. I am hard pressed to even say entity. And so when we think of how AI works, when we think of social media, for example, how every account has an algorithm that's tailored to them. So your algorithm will be different from mine. And so if we swapped phones, for instance, we would find each other's explore feed, for example, very uninteresting. We wouldn't want to come back to that. Why? Because you and I have different interests, you know, different idiosyncrasies, right? And so similarly, if we start using AI for relationships, imagine what would happen if we had like with all the data that we give, we had a perfect AI that was interacting with us on a daily basis, saying the correct things, that doesn't respond to our anger, that doesn't have any like, goals or whatever. It's just there to serve us. And so instead of me looking for a wife and, there's compromise, there's all of these things that go into a relationship, there's love, satisfaction, intimacy, romance, you can't just give that in the beginning. You have to make sure that's consistent. All of these things that make relationships beautiful. I can do that and spend however long, or I can just download an app and get kind of the proximate value of that instantly for free as much as I want. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's going to get even further. I think I had a podcast where I was interviewing a lawyer, and he bring up the same topic of whose rights are they, and who's when they're your memories. If you have stored files of the way people talk and the way people act, and it gets passed on to their spouse or to the children, could you just upload it to a robot and now you have that same person? And now when does that robot have the rights? And we went down rabbit holes into that, and so that was very interesting topic.
it's especially for Gen Z, if you are growing up with these parasocial relationships, it does not spell anything healthy. for, population growth or population stability. So
Yeah, I love this conversation. You're great, great guest, and I'd want to give you some time to talk about your future projects, what you're working on now, and I do want to note that it's all going to be listed in the description below.
thank you, Jonathan. No, I mean, my important thing is that I don't really care if you read the book. I don't care like if you spend money or whatever. My goal is to just give you the information. So if I've done that, then I've been successful in every regard. I can send however many of your audience members. Like I think the PDF is uploaded on Reddit. I did it myself because the point is for me, gatekeeping information is pretty dumb. Because number one, I'll figure out a way to get it for free myself. But number two, it's like if I really believe that this is imperative information, this is necessary information for my generation, and I put it behind a paywall, it's like I'm giving a big middle finger in a way. I just feel kind of dirty doing that. So yeah, the book I can send for free. We're doing a second edition. Again, it's basically everything that's happened between 2022 and 2024 with a part three. And I think the part three is very important, which is about the neuroscience of my generation, basically how our brains and minds have been molded to technology and what effects that has caused in terms of political polarization, which we are seeing a lot of these days, in terms of adult sites and all of those things. I do run a podcast catered to my generation. It's called Gen Z Diplomat Podcast, and basically talking about what we have been discussing. What is the social impact of technology, and how do you make that accessible to my generation? Yeah, I mean, my goal in life is to simply help, and so again, if I've done that, then I've been successful in every regard, and that's intrinsic to me.
And I think we need more people in this world like you. So I do appreciate your time. And, I'm going to put the link for Amazon. I got your book in Amazon, so I'm going to put that link there and, support him over there and grab his book. It's a very good read. So I do highly recommend this book.
Jonathan, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for hosting me.